Hi, I'm Holly Dickman, Water Conservation Specialist for the City of Hays. And with me today I have Lauren Fick, and we are going to talk about planting trees and how to properly plant trees. Fall's an excellent time to do that. Trees are great in terms of water conservation purposes and water quality purposes. And so I'm gonna take a little time and have Lauren show you how to plant this tree correctly.
Hi, my name is Lauren Fick. As Holly said, I am the Horticulture Extension Agent for the Cottonwood Extension District. And we are going to show you guys how to plant a tree properly. The basic thing that you need to know is that tree planting is not a difficult thing to do, but how you plant does affect the future of the tree. So if it is not planted correctly, you ultimately could be risking how long the tree lives, or if it fails and ends up falling on a home or a car or even somebody that's walking by. So if you watch this video, we will make sure to show you how to do it correctly so you don't have to worry about any of those things. As you can see, we've already dug our hole here, and real quick, I'm going to grab the tree so you can just see how big this tree really is. I chose to get a fairly small tree, and you can tell that this has been grown in a container because the shape the roots took. This is circling, and that is not a good thing, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But this is a tree that's a crabapple, and it's going to flower and maybe put on some fruit in the spring, and it's probably going to be about 15 foot wide by 20 foot tall. So not super big, perfect for small yards, front yards, backyards, places like that. And you can tell that the hole, if you can see it very well, the actual hole right here where we're going to be planting the tree is not very big, and it really doesn't need to be for this particular tree. Now if it was a larger tree, that would be a different scenario, but with this tree, really what we're aiming for is twice the size of the root ball right here in width, and really with the depth, you just want the depth so that your roots right here are level with the surface. I'll talk more about that again in a second. But for right now, you'll see that we dug the hole out like this, and that is so we can mulch. And we did it like this because the mulch is going to compete with the grass, and we didn't want the mulch sitting on top of the grass. We want the mulch to protect the tree and absorb that water. So we went ahead and dug the grass out around in order to put the mulch down. All right, going back a little bit, we talked about how this is the planting hole for the tree. Now, if I set this tree in here, how am I going to be able to tell if this is actually the depth it should be? A trick that we use in the trade is to take your shovel or any type of object that you have near you that is a linear stick, stick it across the planting hole, and you can compare where the stick is, which is level with the surface, to the root ball. Right here you can see, and I'll go on this side so you can see better, when I lay it like this, my roots are level with the surface. That is exactly what we want. If you plant a tree too deeply, you run the risk of having girdling roots, which means that they start to circle each other, and eventually over time, it's going to choke out the tree and it's going to fail. Sometimes this happens early on in the tree's life, and a lot of times though, it doesn't happen until they're much, much older, and it's devastating when you have to remove them when they're really old and big and mature. So planting is the first step to make sure that we don't have that happen. Now, you can see that since I have the proper planting height, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to break up this soil ball. This is so important because if you don't, your roots are not going to expand out. A crabapple tree in particular has what we call surface roots. So it wants its roots to be near the surface of the soil. And there's other trees like honey locust that have tap roots that go way, way, way deep into the soil to tap into water. And that's a whole nother topic, but basically what you need to know is that it is really important to break up the soil ball to get those roots stretched out so that they can continue to grow and allow the tree to get bigger. All I do for that is, we call it tickling the roots, and you can do this with any potted plant, garden, container, whatever it is, you can do it with that. And I just go from the bottom, I start from the bottom, and I just kind of start to tickle it like you're scratching your dog or something. You break up all that soil that's been sitting in that pot for however long this tree's been in there, and you want to break it up, really get it loosened up, because if you have any of the roots that are still tightly bound, that could be the difference between a tree that survives for 10 years and 50. You can see this is a pretty good soil. This is kind of a mulch mix, I would say. And one thing that I do personally before I plant trees, I like to give them water about an hour or two before, because I don't want it so saturated when I go to plant that my hands are muddy. That's not helpful either. And you don't want it to be dry, because then you're gonna have a dry tree planted into the ground and you might run the risk of stress. So watering a good amount of an hour before. Typically I will just water enough until I see that the top of the soil surface is a dark deep color. And you can tell sometimes in these container plants, they've got holes in the bottom. You're gonna see water run out. As soon as you see any water run out, that means you're done watering. It's filled all of the soil pore space. All right, I almost got it all broken up to where I need to. These surface roots may also be called feeder roots. They're the same thing. Basically, they're just supportive roots to our lateral root, which I will show you if I can find him. Right here. This is this little guy right here. He's not very big. These are our lateral roots, and they're the big ones that flare right from the bottom of the trunk right here. They are the most important. They are like the heart of the tree, basically, because they are going to be what takes in the most nutrients. And if they are circling, or if they are kinked in any way or damaged, that's pretty much it for your tree. It is not going to last long, because it will not get nearly enough nutrients from these feeder or surface roots. So making sure that this lateral root is near the soil surface is the most important thing, and that is why we break up the soil ball or the root ball, and we make sure that the soil is not too we make sure that our hole is not too deep, because if you plant these, you're gonna get circling, and that's what they do. All right, so I think this is about broken up as I need it to be. You can see all of my roots, and I can really kind of get a feel for what this tree is going to look like as far as its root system. I don't think there's much more to tickle out. You can see right here, some of these roots already started to circle, and right here, you see how it's kinking? That is the issue that we find. So what you can do with some of these roots, if you notice, oh, they're not looking very good, or I need to fix that, they break off fairly easy. Just don't break off your lateral roots. You can break off your surface, or excuse me, your feeder or your surface roots, and it's not going to harm the tree nearly as bad. So I might go ahead and just pinch that guy off. Don't have any pruners with me. Maybe. There we go. Just get rid of that one, because he's going to continue to kink, and it's just going to make the growing process harder.
So Lauren, can I ask a question while you're doing this?
Yes.
What if this was a bigger tree, like a 5-gallon tree? You can go ahead and cut those roots off too on the outside edges, can't you?
Yes, you can. And it's recommended if you have circling roots. I always just say be careful, because when you get in those bigger trees, some of those roots are so much larger, and they are already so dependent, the tree is, on those roots, that if you do anything to those lateral roots or some of those bigger ones, if it has a taproot, do not cut the taproot. That is a vital root to the tree. It's okay to prune some of these off. You don't want your roots so long that they're gonna go ahead and start running into the side of the soil wall right there. That's not gonna help you either.
Just want to make sure it's not root bound and
exactly.
circling around. Make sure that
Exactly.
you fix that before you actually bury the soil or bury the root system.
Exactly. So I think we're good to go for the actual planting. I can see my surface roots right here, and I don't see any other major roots that are kinked, and nothing is running into my soil wall. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this back just a little bit, because as I was pulling off that soil, it kind of filled in my hole for me. So I just like to kind of dig that off to the side. And you can really see right now the planting depth right here. All right. And as long as this tree is center, and I always kind of like to play, I like to play with my tree.
Yep.
And see which way. We usually get southwest wind, so keep that in mind.
Yep.
Because you don't want your weakest side facing the southwest, or you're gonna have some issues on that side too. So if I look at this tree in a whole, we've got this side is way more full filled in this side. And this is our central leader is what we call it. It's the one that's going to continue to get the largest and be the leader of the tree. So,
and it also would depend on where you're planting it in your own landscape, as far as, you know, is it against a house or closer to a house? That all plays into that as well. But we are out here in the middle of wide open space, and so we can just choose the best position for this little crabapple tree.
So now we have placed our tree, and I've chosen to place it so that the most full side faces where the traffic is going to come from. I've inspected the back side of it. There are lots of buds facing the other direction, so we know that it will eventually fill in on this back side. Really, if you had a larger tree, right now would be the time that you would fill in about half of your soil, and then you would take a hose on a slow to medium setting. You would stick it in the hole, fill it so the whole hole is full, turn the hose off, and wait and watch it absorb. And the reason you're doing that is because you want to see how fast your tree is absorbing water. That's going to help you to determine how much you need to water and how often you need to water. With a tree this small, I'm not going to do that because I already know this tree is going to probably need 15 gallons a week on a slow trickle. It's a small tree and it doesn't have a huge root system, so we're going to go with the rule of thumb on this one and just say that it needs the 15 gallons per week. At this point, I'm just going to go ahead and fill in the hole. I'm not going to fill in where we've cleared space for the mulch yet. That'll be the next step. Important thing to remember too, if you're like me and you have to put back some clay soil, try to break it up first. It doesn't necessarily harm the tree, it just allows for the soil to move more when you water it, and therefore the water will be absorbed a little bit quicker. That hard clay.
Which is pretty typical for soil around here. It's pretty heavy.
And there is some grass in mine, and I know that I get a lot of questions about, well, is that a bad thing or a good thing? If you have recently treated your grass with insecticide, pesticide, maybe try to get as much of it out as you possibly can, because especially if you've used a pesticide to kill plants and weeds, it's not ever good to just put something like that directly in the soil when you're planting a new plant. It does not necessarily mean it will harm the tree, but it's better to just be safe than sorry. So if you've recently put down a pesticide to kill off weeds in your grass, I would say try to keep that grass out. Otherwise, grass is actually very beneficial. It has a lot of nutrients, especially nitrogen, so we want to keep that in the soil as much as possible. Okay, so now we have officially put all of the soil back into the root ball and the hole. And the most important thing when we are putting the soil back in is, I talked about those lateral roots, and on a tree there's something called a root flare. That is where those lateral roots come out of, and when you're planting, you'll know when to stop putting soil on top because you want to be able to see the root flare. You can see right here, I can see the top of that lateral root. You want to be able to see that. If that is dug too deep, that is when we start to have our circling roots. And therefore, if you have planted it too deep, just go back, pull the soil back, add a little bit more to the bottom, and keep going until you get it how you need it to be. But that is very important that you can see that root flare, because as the tree gets older, you want to be able to see that, and you should be able to touch it and see exactly where it is. It should not be buried. And we went ahead and put a little berm around this. I don't know if you can really see it. It's kind of a donut, and that's just going to hold the water in when we go ahead and water it. This is ideal for trees that are in parks, or maybe in a spot in your yard that you may not see as much, or just won't get watered as much. It is important to water them adequately so that they grow when they're new, but in the future, if you know that you won't be able to water it as much, it's nice to have a little berm around it to just kind of hold that water in until it can get watered the next time. The guy right here is used to help guide the tree basically. We want the root structure to hold and take place, but with the wind in Kansas, you can't just plant a tree and hope that it is going to survive and not be tilted one way or another or fall over. So what this is going to do is we have staked it down into the soil so that it's pretty sturdy, and it's going to allow the top of our tree to move with the wind, which is important. That's how we establish the soil, the root ball in the soil, and it's going to help to keep that soil ball intact. So when we come back, we want to be able to move our tree, but the soil should not move. If your soil is moving with your root ball, that means that you do not have sturdy roots, and you're going to have to either stake it or cable it or something along those lines until you get those roots established. Otherwise, the next step will be mulching, and I'm going to let Holly talk about that, but if you have questions, you can call the extension office at 785-628-9430. Thank you.
As Lauren said, so the next step of planting a tree that I always recommend as far as water conservation goes, but just in general for the health of the tree, is mulch. And I always recommend organic mulch because over time that breaks down and it helps to improve your soil. We're just using arborist wood chips here that I got from the City Parks Department's wood chip pile, but you can use other types of organic mulch around trees, but these work really great. So, like Lauren said, we're going to go ahead and mulch this area. One thing I want to talk about though is when you mulch, is to mulch correctly. So one thing you do not want to do is pile mulch up against the trunk of this tree. A couple of reasons why is that it can create a really wet area right around the trunk of the tree, which is not good for that tree trunk. It can cause some issues with disease or maybe attract insects and other things like that. So we want to keep the mulch away from the tree trunk, maybe an inch. Now in the wind and the rain, mulch will move, but generally speaking, we want to keep that away from the tree trunk if possible. As far as depth of mulch goes, again, we want to make sure and not mulch too deeply. So usually what's recommended is anywhere from 2 to 4 inches deep. Sometimes you'll see people really pile it on there, and that's not necessary, but just about 2 to 4 inches deep is all that's needed, and that will help moderate that soil temperature. We're planting in the fall, the soil is really warm, and so as we go into fall, this mulch will help act like a blanket and try to keep that soil a little bit warmer and allow those roots to continue to grow long after the leaves have fallen off. And then also it'll help reduce weed competition and also for moisture retention. When you water, it'll retain that moisture. You won't have to come back and water as often. Along that note, we'll go ahead and talk about a little bit more about watering. When you have a new tree like this, fall is a great time to plant because we're not getting hotter and hotter like you are in the springtime going into summer. So go ahead and soak this really deeply and then come back maybe several days later and just check the soil. Actually stick your fingers down there. If it's really muddy, there's no need to go ahead and water again. But if it's starting to dry out, make sure you soak that root ball nice and deep. As the tree grows, you want to continue to expand your area that you're watering. So on a tree like this, or any type of deciduous tree, we recommend that you water within that drip line or under the drip line. The majority of a tree's roots are within the top 12 to 18 inches of soil, so you don't need to water extremely deep. You just need to water about 1 foot and 1.5 feet to get good moisture to those feeder roots that Lauren was talking about earlier. So we're going to continue to mulch this, and we will come back in, and Lauren talked about this little stake we have here. It's also called a guy. We're going to make sure we have a nice little cable to attach it to, so again it can move in the wind, but that root ball is not going to move. And we'll go ahead and mulch this, and then we'll be back. So we have our tree all mulched, like we mentioned. We made more of a mulch donut, it's called, versus a mulch volcano, which is what we don't want to see. You don't want to pile that mulch up against the trunk. And so now we're all done. All we need to do now is make sure we cable on our guy here so our tree doesn't get blown out of the soil. And then we're going to make sure and water it nice and deeply. And like I mentioned, come back and check the soil for when it needs watering again. Lauren mentioned a rule of thumb, which is about 10 to 15 gallons a week for these new little trees. But if it's really cool at night and our soils are heavy, it holds the moisture really well. Sometimes you won't even have to water that much in the fall time. So with that, I'm gonna say goodbye for now and let Lauren add something she wants to add.
Like Holly said, if you have any questions regarding tree planting, varieties, when we can plant, how to plant, if you need anything related to trees, please feel free to call my office, or you can call Holly at the City of Hays and ask us questions. I also have a number that you can text, and that number is 620-869-1188, or you can call my office at 785-628-9430. Thank you for watching our video, and like I said, if you have questions, that's what we're here to help with.